Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Hanging Softly in the Night, a Detective Nick Larson novel by Maria Elena Alonso-Sierra, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1, Monday, January 6th. The scent of decaying flesh, human excrement, and hopelessness assailed Detective Nick Larson as he stood at the entrance of the elegant foyer of the Upper East Side brownstone. Nick's nostrils flared in offense. He gagged. Death was a smell he never got used to. Ah, shit. The vapor from Nick's words hung in the frigid January air. Another body. Just what the department needed after a week from hell. Definitely not what Nick needed, not after barely 2 hours of sleep. He grabbed a couple of booties from the box laid next to the doorway, covered his shoes, and stepped inside the foyer, followed closely by Vic Sacco, his partner for close to 6 years. Sacco coughed. A bit early for the dead to be so pungent, Nick interjected. His face was probably an unhealthy shade of white already. He felt clammy, his skin tight with an inner cold that had nothing to do with the outside temperature. Should have brought my car, not hitched a ride in yours, Nick muttered, covering his nostrils as best he could. Sacco patted Nick's shoulder in commiseration. He was used to Nick's squeamishness every time a dead body turned up. The smell from decomposition always did Nick in, the reason he usually stowed a small bottle of Febreze in his car trunk to spray on the cheap dust masks he kept there. Without it now, Nick would probably dry heave throughout the entire investigation, or run to throw up someplace where he wouldn't contaminate the scene. Sacco passed him by, widening the front door. The gap acted like a vacuum cleaner, with the noxious air slicing the men as it escaped. Larson panted through his mouth, his teeth a pithy barrier against the miasma rushing at him in the sudden cross-current. Somewhere inside the foyer, a "God damn it!" exploded simultaneously with Nick's. "Close the door! Damn door!" The yell came from Tish Ramos, NYPD's Forensic Investigations Division guru, who kept tagging evidence a few feet away. "It's 12 fucking degrees out there!" Sacco ignored the order. "Ramos, I don't care if it's 50 below," Sacco said. "It's either blue balls or my clothes smelling like shit all day. Guess which I prefer." His bull-like head jerked in Larson's direction. "Besides, Larson here is about to puke all over your crime scene. I doubt your shift supervisor will like it." Tish Ramos methodically closed the evidence paper bag, labeled it, and turned her attention to the men. Her eyes captured Nick's 6-foot image in a swift up and down. He knew he looked like a recently crumpled paper bag, skewed tie and all, black hair combed with impatient fingers to give it some sort of order, his angular face already displaying the usual 5 o'clock shadow. He hadn't had time to shave or dress neatly, as was his habit. After shift, he'd fallen face down on his couch and hadn't moved until the call had come through 20 minutes ago. For once, he'd been grateful for the call. It had interrupted a recent, recurring nightmare. "What are you doing here?" Ramos asked. "You're not on call, and this isn't a domestic." "Another flu casualty," Nick croaked, gagged, and rubbed his eyes. He watched as one of the most meticulous women in their Forensic Investigations Division neatly deposited evidence into what the department euphemistically called doggy bags. As usual, Ramos looked sterile, dressed sterile, and breathed sterile. "Captain's tired of juggling the domino meltdown with personnel calling in sick," Nick told her. "We're it for a while unless we fold." "Not that I mind, but why the personal touch here, Ramos? The call came in as suicide." The first responder thought so. At first. Ramos uncurled from her crouch, all 5'2" of her, and gestured toward the rear of the townhouse. "Stan worked with me on a similar supposed suicide about 2 months ago. When he saw the victim, his instinct kicked in. She's too neat. No evidence of thrashing, no rope burns." Nick stared at Ramos, hoping for a denial and knowing he wouldn't get one. Thrashing. Rope burns. Ramos stared back. Regret was there in her chocolate eyes, underscored with a wallop of pity. Nick recognized the look, having known Ramos for 3 years now, ever since she'd come on board FID. She knew there was only one type of incident that affected Nick after the death of Angela, his ex-wife. Only one. The main reason Nick's captain avoided giving him suicides for the moment. That is, until Nick got his shit back together. Hanging. Nick's voice sounded rough. Ramos nodded. Sacco cursed. Who called it in? Nick asked. Anything to delay the inevitable. Ramos's chin jerked toward the uniform. Nick recognized him. Stan Howowitz had 15 years under his belt and was a staple at the 16th Precinct. Always dependable, detail-oriented, and especially experienced. Horowitz studied his clipboard and, without prompting, began giving details. 911 called in the possible 1029 at 0400 from a neighbor across the backyard, he said. Witness is a Pradeep Mansoor. His bedroom gives him a bird's-eye view of the crime scene. Called it in after he realized what he was looking at. Witness coming or going? Nick asked. Yoga before work, Horowitz replied. Bet you the site fucked up his pranayama, Ramos commented and immediately held up a hand. And before you give me your usual wise-ass quip, Sacco, that's a yogi term for breathing exercises. Expand your vocabulary. Nick's lip twitched. Sacco blew Ramos a kiss. Let's start canvassing the area, Stan. Nick turned to Horowitz. Have 2 uniforms roadmap the street and get statements. I'll set up an interview with the witness later. Horowitz extended his clipboard. Nick wrote down the contact info on his flipped notebook. What about the victim, Ramos? Sacco asked. ID? License identifies her as an Isabel Creasy, and without a prelim from OCME, there's practically zilch as to exact cause of death except the obvious, Ramos said, reaching the threshold of the attached sunroom at the rear of the brownstone. Eyeballing it, the victim was probably drugged and placed in the noose like a rag doll. Cursory exam on the neck doesn't show signs of excessive trauma. Totes will tell us more once he gets the victim on the slab. Christopher Millsap, affectionately known as Totes, was medical examiner for New York's finest. Several years ago, some wise-ass had come up with a brilliant syllogism after a fire on the D-line. Amid the chaos on the scene, where 16 people had been trampled and 7 had died from smoke inhalation, the office of chief medical examiner had toted body bags to the morgue for hours until the scene had been cleared. To everyone's misfortune, though, whoever had come up with the affectionate moniker had made it stick, which had truly pissed off Millsap. And you don't piss off Christopher Millsap, M.E. Soon after, Totes returned the favor by baptizing everyone in the precinct with ridiculous nicknames. Now, when anyone was pissed, they used the nicknames to piss everyone else off. Just a wonderful tit-for-tat piss-off game at the 16th. Ramos paused on the threshold and looked at Nick. Ready? Nick's body taunted. Past whispered conversations teased the recesses of his mind. Come to me, Nicky. Save me. You don't want to be saved, Angie. You want to rip and drag me to your level. I'm tired of this shit. Go bleed someone else. His stomach heaved and he broke out in a sweat despite the cold settling through the dark-paneled hallway. He clenched his jaw in his fists. He was Angela's legacy, a pathetic mirror of himself, corroded by guilt and scarred by recrimination. Pathetic, he knew, but he was powerless to stop it for the moment. Ramos stepped through the open French doors into the sunroom. Oh, it's hotter than hell in here, Sacco said, taking stock of the room as he stepped inside. Within seconds, he opened his coat and flapped it. Thermostat set at 92, Ramos answered. For whose benefit, the plants or the victim? Nick asked. Ramos smiled. Watch out where you step. Floor slippery. Nick entered the pentagonal sunroom, breathed minimally, gagged some more, concentrated on a visual catalog of the area. During daylight, the room would absorb light through huge rectangular panels of tempered glass. Now, brightness from environmentally correct light bulbs bounced around generously, spotlighting expensive rattan furniture and tropical plants in an attempt at faux cheer. But the imitation sunshine failed to dispel the smell of tragedy or camouflage the body of a petite woman, dressed in a peach spaghetti-strapped nightgown, hanging in the middle of this greenhouse like meat in a butcher's freezer. Ramos, Nick's chin jerked toward the body, his voice hoarse. You're all goddamn consideration. Unreasonable demand, he knew. Hey, take your frustration out on someone else, Ramos's eyes reproved. Totes hasn't arrived yet. Nick's bile rose. He tasted the acid on his tongue and his throat muscles convulsed as his eyes locked on the woman's body. It was rocking gently from the breeze generated by an overhead fan and further helped by the soft hand of the rotating earth. Nick wished, and not for the first time, he hadn't hitched a ride with Sacco. His partner didn't even carry a jar of Vicks Vapor Rub. The menthol would at least camouflage the smell. Concentrate on the room, damn it, not the body. Nick turned. He surveyed the glass enclosure, delaying and preparing. The sunroom used space and light effectively, especially in a backyard as big as a thimble and surrounded by canyons of brick and steel. The townhomes and apartment buildings in this part of town were notoriously joined like Siamese twins, and every backyard watched a mirror image of itself barely 10 feet away. No privacy. He'd rather hide within the solid walls of his apartment than be exposed like this, with spying or curious eyes lurking 10 feet away behind tasteful window treatments. Nick squinted, focused. Son of a bitch. The witness was glued to his window, his silhouette creating a ghostly dark image against the brightness behind. Horowitz. The officer's head popped around the doorway. Yes, Lieutenant? Get a uniform to the witness's apartment now, Horowitz. Have him close the damn blinds or whatever the hell else the man has on all those windows. I want him blind to what is happening in the crime scene. Horowitz nodded and was about to disappear when Nick stopped him. Have the uniform go through his phone. Confiscate it if you find any photos or videos. He's probably tweeted the fucking universe already. Ramos's words dripped with an angry cynicism. Ramos, buck up, Sacco said. Live video, emojis, hashtags, podcasts, and selfies are the fare du jour. More like the bane of our existence, Nick said, making a mental note to check for postings later. He simply didn't understand the hedonist or narcissist society, take your pick, through which the world muddled, with phones as an added extra appendage, its regurgitated contents more valuable than privacy or morality. There was no filter for the violent, coarse, or vulgar. Like Angela's suicide. By the way, first unit found a suicide letter. Ramos's tone suggested she wasn't buying it. She gestured, palms up to the limp body. First, tell me what you see. Nick tried to keep his composure, but failed miserably, his mind substituting twisted memories for reality. His eyes registered on the victim's curtain of blonde hair, but his brain superimposed shoulder-length chestnut hair over it. Hazel eyes, bulging with fear and strangulation, replaced the closed eyelids of this dead woman. A small mouth, howling like Edvard Munch's The Scream, replaced the almost peaceful lips on the now waxy face of the woman a few feet away. His stomach burned. His mind supplied the acid. Nicky, I need you. You don't need Angie, you butcher. If you don't come back, I'll kill myself. I swear it, Nicky, I'll kill myself. Nick clenched his jaw. This moment proved life was a bitch with an agenda, eager to screw him at every opportunity. His body shuddered. He wondered for the 1000th time if he'd ever be normal again. He needed a drink. He needed his Febreze. He gagged. Here, buddy. Ramos banged a plastic Ziploc bag onto Nick's chest. Heave away. Just make sure to lock it tight after you're done. Sacco chuckled. Always prepared. You're anal, Ramos. Ramos smiled sweetly. You bet your tight ass, Sacco. You boys screw up my crime scene and it's my butt that'll get chewed. She eyed Nick, who was winning the battle with his stomach and his ghosts, and nodded. Now stop wasting my time and get your butts in gear. I need input. Nick concentrated. The real victim came into focus. She hung like a potted plant from a crude noose hooked from the slanting ceiling. Her feet limply pointed to a dining room chair placed 4 inches below her purpling toes. There was no sign of struggle, no evidence of that primitive instinct of survival that rears up as air is choked off. No wonder Ramos was suspicious. Both he and Sacco put on their latex gloves. Unless that rope has retractable properties we don't know of, Sacco said, pointing to the chair between the victim's feet and the chair, pointing to the gap between the victim's feet and the chair. Someone helped her. Nick studied the woman's bare arms. Definitely not a do-it-yourselfer. She doesn't have the upper body strength to hang like a monkey, place that rope around her neck, and then drop. Damn uncomfortable way to commit suicide, not to mention unreliable, Sacco agreed. Nick returned to Ramos. Any evidence of scraping? The chair? Ramos shook her head. That thing hasn't moved a millimeter since it was placed there. She doesn't have scratches around her neck either. Nick looked at his partner. Suicides by hanging were never static. Momentum, jerking, and thrashing always dispersed or overturned anything within a radius of several inches. More importantly, people jumped from their temporary platforms, not hanged themselves above them. Ramos pointed. "Take a look." Psycho held the wobbly ladder Ramos had placed next to the body. Nick climbed. "The plastic protecting the metal on the hook is ripped," Ramos continued. "But the victim was roped first. The cord later looped through and pulled, using the thing as a fulcrum. Lab will determine if there are traces of plastic on the rope itself. After she was hanged, the rest of the room was staged." Nick studied the area to which Ramos had pointed. The hook was the type used to hang heavy objects like boats or bicycles in storage or garage areas. The plastic protector at the well was ripped, the plastic twisted as if someone had squeezed in opposite motions like a mop. Could the damage have been done previously? Nick stepped off the ladder and held it as his partner climbed to take a look. Staff from the medical examiner's office began parading into the room, 2 of them rolling a gurney between them, mumbling excuses for their late arrival. "Don't think so," Ramos said, acknowledging the newcomers with a bob of her head. "No other hook sports the same damage." "You take that side," Nick said to Sacco as he stepped down. Both men roamed the area, weaving around the furniture and the techs in the area. Nick studied the wells of all the other hooks dotting the rafters, saw signs of water damage on some, discoloration from iron rub-off on others, but nothing similar to what had happened to the victim's hook. He caught Sacco's attention, but his partner shook his head. He'd found nothing. "Oh, and that's not the best," Ramos said, understanding the silent communication between the men. "Look at the left front leg of the chair near the floor." Nick inched closer and crouched carefully. There was a clear donut-like ring circling its base. "Is that ice?" His tone was incredulous. "Ice," Ramos confirmed. They stared at each other, wondering how the hell ice had wrapped itself around a suicide's chair in a room steaming worse than a decaying tropical hothouse. "This has got to be someone's idea of a joke," Nick said, still incredulous. "How'd the ice get there?" Sacco asked. Ramos gave Sacco the look, the one that said his question didn't deserve consideration or an answer from her. "I've been working here for half an hour. The house was toasty until you clowns tilted the temperature to freezing. How on earth could ice form at the base of that chair? You're the genius detective. You tell me." Nick interrupted before the banter between these two got out of hand. "Outage?" Millsap maneuvered around the growing number of live bodies filling the area and headed straight up for the body, spouting apologies for the bitch traffic on 34th. Possible, but doubtful," Ramos said. "Even if Con Ed short-circuited around the area, there's simply no time for bodily fluids to congeal that quickly." Nick made a notation to contact Con Edison for electrical outages nearby. "When was TOD?" "By my thermometer," Millsap told the room in general, knowing everyone would be paying attention to his voice. "She's been gone for several hours." He took the liver probe out of the victim and swabbed at the growing perspiration on his brow with his forearm. "But then here in the room from Amazon Hill, her body temp read will be off. We'll let you know later." Ramos crooked her fingers so the men would follow her. They stepped into the colder foyer. "Even if there were power hiccups," Ramos continued, "cursory glance doesn't show any environmental particles inside the ice. As a matter of fact, the material is too clear." She walked to her evidence collection kit, bent, and retrieved a sheet of paper cradled against a plastic evidence bag. Nick reached out. "Is that the suicide note?" "Read it and weep." Ramos relinquished the plastic baggie. "Lies. All liars. Time to sleep." "Cheerful," Sacco said. "And can't spell worth shit." Nick shook his head. It was taped on the outside of the closed doorway. Ramos picked her camera and showed the men the digital photograph she'd taken earlier. "I'm hoping for some fingerprint evidence on it. Print the plant pot by the body as well." The overflowing basket with blossoms of what looked to Nick like impatience had been carefully retrieved from its hook, placed neatly on an end table at the edge of the sunroom nearest the victim, and replaced by another, more macabre showpiece. "Telling me my job, GQ," Ramos quipped. Her mouth jerked a bit upward. "Me?" Nick smiled. "Never, Kit Kat. A man knows when to stop imminent castration." "Such cloying sweetness," said Sacco. "Don't make me puke. We all know you are neither sweet, tasty, nor soft, Ramos." Ah, there's the rub. Wouldn't you like to know? Ramos said. Oh, yes, he would, Millsap said, jerking his chin towards Sacco while zipping the victim into her temporary travel bag. Everyone's betting on when you'll finally do the horizontal dance. I have $20 in the office pool. Nick choked. Sacco turned an unhealthy shade of red. Ramos made as if she hadn't heard a thing and continued to uncap an evidence jar from her pocket. She crouched to grab the ice. Gotta keep bagging, boys. Later. Nick's eyes followed her. Through the open doorway, activity continued at a respectful decibel in deference to the victim. Flashes from cameras cataloging everything at the scene lit the area from time to time. The body was bagged and ready to go. They would be processing the scene for hours. And it wasn't even 6 o'clock in the morning yet.